Vasudevaya. We spent some time on the 10th chapter over the last few weeks. So it might be nice to just quickly attempt a summary. There's different ways to summarize things. One thing you can do is you can try to chronologically go through all 42 verses of the chapter and take people on a journey, a short paraphrased journey, but go through all 42 verses. Can this be over here? Just make my life easier. Is there some reason? Now that you guys are married? Yeah, it's great. It's better. Otherwise, you're just the only people over there. I don't know, like the married person section or something like that. I don't know. So, yeah, that's one way to do it. I think probably a better way, what you guys should be working on, is the major 3 or 4 themes in a given chapter and how the chapter flows from a thematic point of view. I think there's value in that for you guys. And that should be something that you can do. We spent weeks and weeks. If you study the chapter correctly, you should be able to, with no preparation, remember the major themes of the chapter, the major chunks of the chapter, and see how they fit together. You won't get everything. And there is a little bit of room for how you view the chapter, what sticks out to you. But with a little bit of room for artistic interpretation and individual inspiration, there's a pretty solid core of basic ideas that were introduced that you can't get around. They represent the major core of what's covered in the chapter, the major themes, the thread of continuity, the connections between the previous and the subsequent chapters. This stuff is not just a tabula rasa, a blank slate, where you can just say anything you want. Because we're studying a text with 42 verses. And, they're in sequence. And there are certain things that are said, and certain ways that you move from one subject to another. And so it's not just a free-for-all, the way most ignorant people would like to have it be. So although there might be a little bit of room for artistic interpretation or individual inspiration, for the most part, we should all, at this point, if we've spent the last few weeks studying the chapter, give a quick 1-minute analysis of the chapter and hit all the major points. Go. Loud, so I don't have to repeat what you say.
The chapter begins with Krishna reaching the end of a long monologue that went over the course of several chapters, where essentially he talked about how he's the absolute truth. Then, once he reached the end of his monologue, Arjuna asked him more ways that he could understand Krishna being in this world as that absolute truth. Then Krishna gives him a series, like a long list of ways that Arjuna might be able to see him in the world.
I mean, that's excellent. It was brief. I would have covered a few more points, but there's nothing more basic than that. You hit the most basic, the most basic motif of the chapter you hit. The thing about Krishna finished a big long monologue, that was like a little detail that you added in that was important to you because I spent a whole class on that. But the thing about Arjuna asking how he can see Krishna in this world And it's important that you say in this world because it helps to focus what exactly Arjuna was asking, and it's not clear from Arjuna's question, but we know that's what Arjuna was asking because that's how Krishna chose to answer him. Okay. Carlos, give me a thumbs up if you heard Nick's recap. Okay. All right. Go, Ross. And you can also just repeat what Nick said. Obviously, you won't get much credit if you don't add anything of your own and you merely do a bad job of repeating exactly what he said and there's none of your own panache. But Nick hit the major, so you're not going to get it. There's no way to do the chapter without hitting the point he made. Just do it loud so that I don't have to repeat anything you say.
Krishna had a long monologue with Arjuna. Finally, Arjuna accepted what Krishna said about him being the ultimate truth and the creator of everything. After everything that had been expressed by Krishna over that monologue, at that point, then Arjuna asked Krishna for some examples of how he can see Krishna in his world, and Krishna proceeded to tell him numerous examples.
It's good. It was good. You add the in this world thing. You also swapped out absolute truth for supreme truth, and you said the creator. I don't know why you wouldn't just say God. Carlos, give me a thumbs up if you heard what Ross said. Nah, he didn't even hear you, man. I don't know why you guys can't just yell. Like, I really don't understand why. Then move close to the microphone. I don't know, man. It's just like, really? I mean, I had a supreme absolute truth. I don't know why the absolute truth. I don't know why that language. Why not just say God?
Because they distinguishing from the demigods, so I was trying to do that.
No, I'm critiquing him. But please stop mumbling at me. Please. If you have to mumble, just don't talk. If you can't speak loudly like an adult male, then just be quiet. Because I can't repeat everything you say, and I have people here listening. Of course, you can speak like an adult female. If you're an adult female, that's okay too. And if you're a child, you can speak loudly like a child. That's okay also. I'm not trying to do some kind of age discrimination or gender discrimination, but I just want everybody to talk loudly, and if you can't talk loudly, don't talk. Yeah, you said absolute truth, but there was no reason to say that. What does that mean, absolute truth?
Yeah, it's obfuscating. It's just because I'm afraid to say God in public, I think.
You're mumbling. You're killing me. I'm trying to have an interactive class. The only way I can do that is if all of you talk loudly. Otherwise, you turn me into your servant. I'm like some kind of I don't know, like toilet cleaner for you. And you're my Lord, and I clean your toilets for you because I'm forced to repeat what you say like a town crier because you're so big and I'm so small that my only goal in life is to repeat what you say as some kind of megaphone. It's incredibly disrespectful. It's the opposite of how you're supposed to treat your teacher. I've asked multiple times to speak loudly. I do not want to ask again. I'll have to change my entire class model if you can't just do what I've asked. If you don't say God, people are left wondering, what do you mean when you say absolute truth? How does that differ from God? Creator is better. You made an improvement over what he said by introducing creator. Now, if you don't want to use the term God, then you have to use some other term which is equally self-explanatory. But absolute truth, if you're in our family, it might make sense. But if you're recapping for someone who's not in our family, they're not going to get it. Who else can do a recap of the chapter?
At this point in the Gita, Arjuna knows that Krishna is God, and Arjuna asks how he can see Krishna in this world. Krishna gives him a variety of ways that Arjuna or anyone can see Krishna in this world, both things that would be in line with a standard version of God, of like powerful and kind, or actually just kind, and then he also gives an example or various examples of things that might be more disturbing to someone. Regardless, he gives a variety of ways that he can be seen in this world, and then at the end makes the point that all of the things in this world are just one tiny drop of how big and powerful he really is.
Carlos, give me a thumbs up if you heard her. Yeah, it was good, right? Yeah. You get an A just simply for speaking loudly and not trailing off a few sentences in. You got into some deep water there for a second, and you kind of fell apart. You probably work on that. You added a couple things. Number one, that at the end, Krishna said, everything's a spark of my splendor. And number two, that Krishna didn't just say he was all the good stuff that you normally associate with God, but he also said he was the bad stuff like death and time. That's a little trickier, but is required if you want to have a complete conception of divinity and see how everything truly comes from God. And you have to reconcile the problem of suffering or the problem of evil. And so Krishna starts to touch on that, which means he's not giving just the alpha, but he's giving the alpha through the omega. That was good. That's what you were trying to say. I think you suffered from cadence problems. I don't think the words you said were bad. It was just you said them with a lack of confidence that was disturbing enough that it made it almost impossible to know what you were saying unless you already knew the answer. It was a problem of your delivery. Did you guys follow that? When you're speaking something, it's as important as what you say, it's how you say it. If you say, and I have a hard time figuring out how to do this because I don't speak foolishly like you do, because I just know how to make my points and say them and be clear and speak in complete sentences without drifting off and stuttering and mumbling. And so the result of me talking is that you can always understand my words because they're put into a proper cadence and delivered with proper intonation. It's like when I try to mess up kartals to empathize with bad kartal players. I can't be off rhythm. It's unnatural for me. And so I also have a hard time using the kind of cadence I'm trying to describe. Did I do a good job, or were you able to follow me? Were you able to follow me, or did that confuse you?
I understood.
Yeah. Did you understand what she was saying with her recap?
Yeah, she just, I think, was scared she was going to mess it up,
And as a result of being scared of messing it up, she messed it up.
yes.
Because what you say is only half the equation. The other half is how you say it. All right. Let's keep going. Who else? Varungi. Loud and proud.
Krishna starts out the chapter by explaining his immanence, how he's actually the origin of everything, how he's beyond everything, and he's everything that he's been talking and explaining to Arjuna this far, he's summarizing it and adding a little more. After that, Arjuna stops, or continues after Krishna stops, and he reassures Krishna that he has no more doubts, that he's completely sold on the fact that Krishna is the supreme person, God. Then Arjuna naturally asks the question of, well, how can I see you and think of you and connect with you in this world? And Krishna gives him tangible examples on how Arjuna can think of him and connect with him here, giving the other side of the equation, which is immanence. So we get a whole example of Krishna's immanence and transcendence in this chapter.
Yeah, that was good. You used the word immanence twice. You said Krishna described his immanence in the beginning of the chapter, and he described his immanence in the end of the chapter, and you said, therefore we get his transcendence and immanence, which would just be you using the wrong word. But the problem is Krishna didn't describe his transcendence at any place in the chapter, really. The entire chapter was about immanence. So the whole thing you tried to add in, that the chapter was about immanence and transcendence being harmonized, wasn't what this chapter is about. Everything which exists comes from me. Everything you'll see. I'm the source of all the world. Everything emanates from me. If you know this, you'll worship me. The 7 great sages don't know me, who am their origin. Like, where? At what point? Where is Krishna talking about all this transcendence you're talking about?
I guess I understood it as Krishna, like, being the origin of things that were way past Arjuna's time. That's transcendent because it's not here and now.
No. Transcendence is spiritual stuff. Stuff in the past is just immanent stuff in the past. Temporal stuff in this world is what's meant by immanence. Transcendent stuff is stuff in heaven, beyond this world. Did you follow that? So that whole transcendent immanence thing you tried to affix, it's like some extra unnecessary appendage. Do you follow?
Yeah.
Other than that, it was the best one yet. You also said God, source of everything, one without a second, cause of all causes. You used language which was way better than the supreme absolute truth, which requires a couple of paragraphs. It's not fine to say supreme personality of Godhead, supreme absolute truth. Prabhupada likes that language. But then he spends paragraphs explaining that language so he can then use it meaningfully. Unless you're planning on doing that, you got to be careful to use plain language for people. I thought we did good. You guys were just way louder. You heard that last one too, Carlos, right? No problem? Yeah. Excellent. All right, here's mine. No, that's it. No questions. Question-free zone. Okay, here's mine. Krishna wrapped up the last chapter by telling Arjuna to be a devotee. And on the heels of that, he started this chapter off by explaining more about his power, how everything comes from him, how he's supreme, how even intelligence and doubts, so it was both good and bad stuff, come from him, how no one can truly understand him. And he sets up this situation where we realize how small we are and how great God is, and how there be no way for us to fully understand Krishna as he is. And then Krishna speaks the Chatushloki. So the first thing is, on the heels of Be My Devotee, Krishna explains something about how wonderful and amazing he is. But how wonderful and amazing he is with 2 added elements. 1, you can't understand him. Nobody can. And number 2, that good and bad stuff come from him. It actually happens in the beginning of the chapter. It's foreshadowing. Then Krishna sets it up and he speaks the Chatushloki, which is information about the nature of divinity. I'm the source of everything. Everything comes from me. How you respond to that. You worship God with your whole heart, being enlightened. So there's a juxtapositioning of harmonizing, rather, of 2 qualities, intelligence and emotion. How do you worship Krishna? You enlighten people and you dedicate your mind, body, and words as a cognitive behavioral aspect. What does Krishna do for you? There's the grace thing. He gives you enlightenment so you can further your journey. That's that grace thing that's required. And then finally, he actually illuminates you from within. And so there's a larger form of grace that you get. And when Krishna finishes that, he's really wrapped up chapters of a monologue, really. And Arjuna responds big. Param Brahma, Param Dhamma, Pavitram, Paramam Bhavam, Purusham, Shashvatam, Divyam, Adi Devam, Ajam Vibhum. He says, you're the supreme Lord, the God of God, King of Kings, the original person, the eternal person, blah, 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 blah. But then Arjuna, he accepts it. He has no doubts. But he wants to see Krishna in this world. He wants to be reminded of Krishna in this world. Because this world, it's so easy to forget God. And when I say God, I mean the source of everything which exists. The supreme transcendent being from whom all existence, including our individuality, comes from. And then Krishna describes himself as the superlative exemplar in 70 categories. From being the alpha to the omega, to the first letter of the alphabet, to death, which takes everything away, to time, to sharks in the ocean, to the Himalayas, to getting into some of the more cultural stuff amongst the Adityas and the Maruts and the Rudras. He identifies himself with people, places, things in an effort to paint a picture of a world where you can see God everywhere. And continuing with what he foreshadowed, where he mentions that he's the source of doubt too, he also touches on some thornier subjects that are generally difficult for theologians to deal with. How God's also the source of suffering and how there's value in suffering. And so Krishna touches on some of those subjects, and that gives you food for thought so you can really reflect on a full conception of divinity. And then he wraps it up at the end and says, Yat yat vibhuti mat sattvam shrimad urjitam eva cha tat tat evavagachatvam mama tejangsa sambhavam. He says that whenever you see something which is especially powerful or wonderful or amazing, you should understand that that's born from me, from my power. And eventually he says, Ekang senasti tojiga, what need is there for all this discussion? By one little piece of myself, I manifest the entire universe. And so Krishna there gives you a little sense of transcendence. That God appearing in this world is just a tiny spark of his splendor. And he also potentially exists beyond this world as well. And so that, in some ways that gives you a little bit of an homage at the end to the transcendent aspect of the deity. Or it would just be power and immanence far beyond what we could possibly experience. You could go either way with it. That's how I would wrap up the chapter. I got into some details. I connected some points you didn't connect. I went a little slower. I stopped to smell the roses. And I think I gave a much fuller version of the chapter. I don't think it's something you couldn't do. You just have to pay attention a little more and look for those threads of continuity. You guys gave a stripped down version. You each went in little strange little directions. I went in my own strange directions. But I tried to make my strange directions things which were relevant to the chapter and understand the chapter and getting value out of the chapter. The thornier topics I got from you. More words about the nature of God I got from you. The transcendence and immanence, I corrected it from you. What happened in the beginning of the chapter and the Chatushloki, that was something you guys didn't add in, which was obviously there. And then a little bit about the end, which I think you also brought up a little bit, the end. Okay, good. We should be able to speak on these topics because we should These books are our friends. We should understand them. The same way you understand your favorite movie. You watch it and understand it, and you take the trouble to piece it together because it's important. Same way you know your way around the kitchen if you like to cook. Some way you learn how to lift weights. We learn all sorts of complicated skills. You learn how to wrestle. So many skills we learn. Because we value it. So we take the trouble to commit stuff to memory. The same way we learn how to translate, or we learn how to counsel, and what the standard of care is. How to fix a computer. How to wash a car. We learn so many complicated skills that are important to us. This isn't any more complicated. You just have to take it seriously and value it, and take the master course where you're really trying to understand it. Did you guys follow that? I like these last two verses. We didn't get a chance to explore them, so let's look at them. Let's start with text 40. There is no end to my divine manifestations, my vibhuti, divyanam, of my divine vibhutis. Divyanam is where you get the word divine from in English, from div in Sanskrit. Of my divine vibhuti. Vibhuti came up multiple places in the chapter. It came up in the beginning of the chapter, and then in the middle of the chapter, and now at the end of the chapter. Vibhuti means opulence, power, and so that word is used to talk about, the powerful manifestations of God's sovereignty, of God's might that you find in this world. When Sai Baba, the Indian dude with the afro who molested kids, who was a huge avatar level guru in India, when he would have ash, he would have ash come, he'd have ash in his hand, he'd give it to people. They would call that vibhuti. It was like a manifestation of his power. So they would call that ash that he would miraculously make. It was up his sleeve. But they would call that vibhuti. When he would do parlor tricks, he would give you a coin or something like that. That was vibhuti. He was like, hey, look behind your ears. He did that and, wowed crowds for generations of crowds gathered to have him do parlor tricks. So that was called vibhuti. And so, obviously they were co-opting this type of language in Vedic texts about the power of God and the displayed opulence of God. You follow? What I've spoken to you is but a mere indication of my infinite opulences. Know that all opulent, beautiful, and glorious creations spring from but a spark of my splendor. Yat vibhuti mat sattvam. Whatever exists that has the nature of being vibhuti, of being powerful or amazing. Shrimat, beautiful. Urjitam, powerful. Evava, tat. Evava gachatvam. That thing comes from me. Mama teja angsa sambhavam. Born from a spark of my splendor. It's a far out idea. Right? Urja means powerful. It doesn't necessarily mean friendly. So Shrimat is more beautiful, but Urja is more powerful and less necessarily like fun. Does that make sense? So in this verse, it's a little bit subtle, but Krishna is opening the door up that really anything you see that's incredibly powerful, incredibly strong, amazing. You could, for instance, look at a genocidal killing machine like the Nazi Final Solution, where they disposed of over 10 million people in a very, very short period of time. And you could see that ability to organize and galvanize around a certain point, or even, you could look at Hitler's incredibly powerful speech-giving abilities. You follow? And you could, I think, appreciate that whatever was amazing, even if it was amazing and bad, you could be reminded of God, who's ultimately the most amazing yet good. And you could sever the bad from Krishna, because we have our free will and we can mess stuff up. But you could appreciate the power, the might, the organizational ability, the charisma, or whatever. And you could see, that's somebody misusing borrowed plumes. That's somebody misusing what was given by God. You follow? That might seem unnecessary to do. Why view Hitler's charisma as being God-given? Why view the way he was able to galvanize the entire country of Germany and commit atrocious war crimes and murder unlimited numbers, practically speaking? You start crossing north of 10 million people killed in a matter of a few years. You might as well just say unlimited. It's so massive. Tens of thousands of people a day. You following this? You get this? What would be the need for seeing that as coming from Krishna? I think the value in it is that you no longer live in a world that's dualistic, where there's just a bunch of stuff that doesn't fit in. It exists, but it doesn't fit into your theistic worldview. And you end up having a need for a devil. And you live in a dangerous world, surrounded by powerful foes. And you got to cultivate the ability to it's like all the world's a stage and we are merely players, and every person in their lifetime plays many roles. You know that statement by Shakespeare? It's a kind of a grand vision where Krishna is everywhere, even in the bad stuff. Doesn't mean he's responsible for the bad stuff. You obviously have to do a little bit of troubleshooting. But you can see Krishna in the cancer. You can see Krishna in the death. You can see Krishna in the suffering. You can find the meaning and the purpose behind everything. And then you don't live in a dangerous world. You live in a world where ultimately Krishna's still in charge, and those people who are doing whatever they're doing they're misusing their free will, and at the same time they're equalizing the karma of other people and creating their own karma at the same time. Therefore they get all the blame for what they did wrong, and at the same time nothing happens by accident. Give me 1 second. Do you guys follow that? So this idea of you can see anything, anywhere, that has some just incredibly powerful or beautiful or charismatic or whatever it is, just something where it's just there's really something to it. Ultimately it boils down to power. And you can always see that being connected to Krishna, even when it's been perverted, even when it's being used in the wrong way. And it's just not scary, because you know there's somebody ultimately behind it. And okay, they borrowed plumes, but it'll end. Does that make sense? And you actually find some peace from that. You can live in this world. I see that's what Krishna's saying here. And then, but what is there for all this detailed knowledge? With a single fragment of myself, I pervade and support the entire universe. That's really a summary of the whole chapter. Atava bahunaitena kim yatena tavarjuna. What of all these? What even of all these? With knowing all this, Arjuna? What even with knowing all of these things about me, Arjuna? Vistabhyam aham krishnam. I pervade everything completely. Ek angsena. By one fragment of myself. By one fragment of myself. He told you, God, I'm situated in this world pervading everything. That again is just, it gives you an idea of the magnitude of Krishna, so you won't think pantheistically that Krishna's just in the things you know, but there's so much more to the puzzle. So Krishna finishes powerfully. He's like, everywhere you look, you see me, and you only see this much of me. It's cool. He simultaneously says, everywhere you look, you see me. I'm everywhere. My fingerprints are on everything. Right? And then he says, and you're wasting your time because this isn't even just not even a tiny little piece of me. It's powerful language for me. Krishna asks a rhetorical question. But what of knowing all these amazing things about me? I pervade everything with a single fragment of myself. Everywhere you look, everything you see that's amazing is ultimately coming from my power. And just this much. You guys follow that? It's like you arm wrestle somebody and he just beats you, destroys you. Like, wow, he's really good. He's like, that's my bad arm. It's your good arm and my bad arm. Right? You understand? Or you go like shooting with somebody and they shoot so much better than you. And they're like, yeah, I'm shooting with my offhand. It's not even my good hand. They're shooting one arm with their bad hand. And so, but none of those examples really make sense because Krishna literally says, everything in the entire creation you see that's amazing, good, bad, or ugly, ultimately comes from me. It's a borrowed plume from me. and a borrowed form of one little atom of myself. It's so over the top that none of the examples we could give really suffice. It's a powerful statement, isn't it? And you really see this careful navigating of Krishna encouraging us to see him in this world in a pantheistic way without getting lost in pantheism and keeping that panentheism alive, that he's also beyond the world. And so in a lot of ways you could see this as being a fleshing out in considerable detail with examples of ideas that he's introduced previously. That everything is in me and I'm not in everything. Everything is in me and I'm beyond everything. You follow? That idea has been introduced so many times in the Gita. And even this idea of, the strength of the strong and the fragrance of the earth and the taste of water, and I am the Vedic Yajna and I withhold and send forth rain. And Krishna's done this, identifying himself with things in the world twice, in the 7th chapter and in the 9th chapter. But not like this. That was with maybe 10 or 15 items. And this is with scores of items, 70 items. And in the 7th and 9th chapter, Krishna actually lays out this idea of panentheism. Those are the two places where he explains this. Everything's within me and I'm not in everything, and I'm not in anything. I'm beyond the world. Those are the two places where he explains it, and he gives these type of examples to help you wrap your head around it. But here he does so much more, and he gives you some more bookends on either side to really help you understand what he's talking about. So you can appreciate Krishna in the world without limiting Krishna. You figure, like, if you look at idol worship, for instance, and of course the word idol is just a way of criticizing the icons of a tradition you don't care for. Like if you say to a Christian, oh, I see you have idols of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit on that painting. They'll say, no, this is just a depiction. Oh, I see you're wearing a talisman around your neck and a cross. That's an idol. You follow? They'll say, no. Or even something like the Eucharist. Oh, I see through the transubstantiation you're creating an idol out of that wafer and that wine. It's a very interesting ritual where you create an idol and you say it's like a totem. It's like a fetish, right? Like you may turn into this like powerful item that you then venerate and you consume it. It's like very cannibalistic. It's very cannibalistic. Even the idea is that you're eating the body and blood of Christ, but you just like invoke power, and with your mantras you create an idol out of it. They would say you're so offensive. This is our tradition. We understand that God's beyond the world. These are ways we remember the divine. Those are icons. Oh, I see you have all these idols at the Catholic Church. No, there's a statue of our saints. We don't think that that's God. Oh, I see you're worshiping them with garlands and cleaning them. It's like, clearly you're a polytheistic tradition. And you have all these idols and totems, talismans, fetishes. And any Christian worth their salt. Or let's go even bigger. Ooh, you fetishized your sacred text, the Bible. If you get like a really heavy-duty Protestant who is non-denominational, where they don't wear crosses, they don't have any paintings on the wall, it's just an empty room with a lectern, right? They still got their sacred text that they venerate. It's written by men, but you think it was like has the power of God in it. You fetishize it. You created a totem out of it. You follow? I'm using the word fetish in the way it's used originally, what the word fetish means. The sexual usage for paraphilia, for fetish, is a later usage. But when you instill a mundane object with divine power and venerate it. That's called a fetish, or a totem, or a talisman, or an idol. You follow? But nobody wants to admit that, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. Nobody says that. They say, no, these are icons. They just switched. It's the same. It's still an I word. These are icons. These are tokens of my faith. These are. You understand? Oh, the American military. You guys have fetishized the American flag. Right? Like if I urinate on it, it hurts you. That's what it symbolizes. Really? Because that's like what my statue is for me. That's what a totem pole is. There's actually a good reason for fetishizing flags. Your flag means you control territory. So you put the flag up and you tell your soldiers, don't ever let anybody take this flag down. Fight for this flag, defend this flag with your life. And really, war is a game of capture the flag. You control certain key territories, high ground, certain key fortifications, and then you rule. That's how it works. That's why you build your fortress on top of a mountain. And so you control high ground, and then people have a real hard time dethroning you. And so when you establish a fort or a colony and you hang a flag, it means we are in charge of this place because we can defend this place from people coming. And it really becomes a game of capture the flag with guns and knives and swords and violence. But you have to make it simple for people. Don't let them touch the flag. Don't let them take our flag down. Defend the ground that the flag is on. You follow? It makes sense. Of course, people don't understand this unless you're like a captain or something like that. You get some kind of education, military strategy, and psychology. Then you might understand some of this stuff. But for most people, they're just told, don't let the flag touch the ground ever. Well, why not? Like, so what? You follow? But by saying it's important, then people start to treat the ground it's on, the pole it's on, and everything like with importance. And that's how it works most of it. Thank you. So, does that make sense? So when you refer to the icons and the symbols, the power symbols of another tradition, you call them idols, disparagingly. You follow? But the Jews, there is no Christian critique of idolatry. The Christian critique of idolatry is all taken from the Old Testament, which is a Greek translation of the Torah. And so the critiques of idolatry belong to the Jews. They still exist in Christianity. You couldn't eat meat from pagan altars. That was a big one for the Jews who were following Jesus, because the Romans were polytheistic. They had idols, and there's so much like Jews, Muslims. They all know killing is wrong. So you have to kill and chant mantras, and it's okay. You follow? You have to kill and use the right knife, and it's okay. Or a priest has to do the killing, then it's okay. But if you look at it's like halal, and you look at kosher, and even in the New Testament, there's rules against eating meat from pagan altars, eating meat from strangled animals. That's in the book of Acts. The early Christians had to follow these rules. It's in the New Testament. It's like they all get it. That killing is wrong. But nobody can stop eating meat, so they have to figure out a way to justify it. But anyway, where you get the real critiques of idolatry of Babylon, really. It's the Babylonians that the Jews were fighting against and arguing with. And so, I'm a jealous God, and thou shalt have no other God before me, and no graven image, no engraved image. But the Torah. It's It's wrapped in silk cloth with silver and gold caps on it, and they dance with it on their heads. I mean, give me a break. Right? Give me a break, you know? So when you say idol, what you're really doing is you just have an easy way to criticize somebody else's religious symbols without bothering to make an argument. Now, given this statement of the Gita, that Krishna is everywhere and in everything, but he's also beyond anything in this world. If we then choose to make some deities and venerate those deities, how can you accuse us of idol worship? Our theology, our sacred text, our teaching demonstrates that we are not limiting God and saying God's just in this statue, or God's just here, or God's just there. It shows that we're way, way more well thought out than that. You follow? So when you're looking to find out somebody's like an idol worshiper, you got to ask them, why? What are you doing there? Why you got that little statue? What's going on with that? And like Barack Obama carried Hanuman around in his pocket. Do you guys know this? A little Hanuman deity carried around in his pocket, like with his keychain or something like that. He always carried it with him. Is that an idol? For sure. It's a talisman that he carried in his pocket to rub for good luck. It's a rabbit's foot. I never knew whether those rabbit's foot were actual rabbit's feet or whether they were fake. I think they were actually rabbit's feet, and they dyed it because you could feel kind of like the claw on it. I think those like rabbit foots you used to buy from the toy store as a kid. I think those are actual rabbit's feet, dyed fluorescent pink and green and whatever. What the hell is wrong with people? Are you kidding me? It's like insane, right? Like, what is wrong with people? And they asked Barack, what does he carry in his pocket? He showed him Hanuman. He's like, yeah, I just carry him around for luck. That's straight up. That's a fetish. That's totem. That's talisman. 100%. That's an idol. That's exactly what the Jews and the Christians were against. Like, you nailed it. You are fully out of the safe zone of Christianity and Judaism. You blew it, dude. I mean, I think it's fine, but it's kind of rude. You like rubbing. It's like, you know what I mean? It's like have a little bit of veneration for the deity you're carrying. But you ask somebody, what are you doing with that? What do you understand that to be? And no matter how many statues we make, you read verses like this from our sacred text, it makes it really clear that we're not some primitive, animistic. And so all the critiques of the Jews against us, they don't work because they're based on this idea that you think that's God. But we don't think that's God. We think that's God, and so is everything else, and this is a way for us to instantiate, our understanding that God is everywhere and in all things. Sanatana Goswami said in one place 5 centuries ago, if you understand that Krishna is in everything, you could even worship a blade of grass. Our deity worship is an extension of our theology. You can say, well, if God's everywhere, then you can never make a deity because you have to just look at the universe and see God everywhere. Or you could say, if you see God everywhere, everything becomes a deity. You go either way. You follow? There's not one of those more naturally derives from the idea that God is everywhere. If God's everywhere and in all things, either A, you don't have an image because you don't want to corrupt anybody's mind and make him think God's only one place, or you do make images because you know God's everywhere, and so therefore God could also be in this image, and it gives you a place where you can focus your worship. But there's not one of those isn't more intellectually respectable or more naturally derivable from the idea that God's in all things and beyond the world. You follow? This is why it's important that you guys can recap the chapter. So you actually understand the tradition. You understand what's going on. So if you get, dropped down in one of our texts, somebody just opens a random page, goes, explain that. You'll be able to go, okay, go back a couple pages, look forward a couple pages, look at the purports, look at the verses that are quoted in the purports, okay, here's what's going on. And just get dropped down into any circumstance and immediately understand where you are because you've learned the art of putting jigsaw puzzles together. You've learned the art of figuring stuff out. Does this make sense? It's like you take like a U.S. or an Olympic wrestler, let's say from like a, Eastern European country, and you take him to Mongolia, and you're like, let's do Mongolian wrestling. They'll be like, okay. And they'll watch the guy do Mongolian wrestling, and they'll be like, okay, and they'll go out and beat him. Because they're the best wrestlers on the planet. You follow? They can go into somebody else's sport and beat them. Or you take an expert surfer to a beach he's never been to before, and you drop him down, you go, okay, go surf. And it's like, it's like Mavericks or something like that. And he'll just go and he'll watch the waves. He'll see how many waves are coming at a time, how the sets are going, what the break is. And all of a sudden he'll just like be waiting there for about 10 minutes looking around. And all of a sudden he'll just run out, jump in the water, and swim out and start swimming. Because he understands the water and breaks and shore breaks and where the water's deep and where it's not deep. And he watches what people are doing. He knows how to figure it out. You can drop him in. Does that make sense? Like my refrigeration repair guy at my restaurant. Sometimes I buy new equipment. I'm like, go take a look at the equipment. He knows what equipment looks like. He's buying equipment. If I'm buying equipment, he looks at it. He's like, yeah, this is good equipment. No, it's not good equipment. He can look at any equipment. Why? Because he knows it. He gets how it works. You drop any patient in on Shri, and she can just immediately psychoanalyze them and figure out where they're coming from. You get dropped down into any situation south of the border, and you can, like, because you speak Spanish fluently, kind of, you can figure out what's going on. We should have that kind of feeling and confidence in our sacred text. And Carlos made a nice point. He said Krishna's left pinky. I know Carlos is a bit, I would normally use the term uppity, but that term actually has a really bigoted, racist past. So he's kind of fresh and mouthy, but he makes a nice point here. Krishna's left pinky. Krishna picks up Govardhan Hill with the pinky of his left hand, the way a child picks up a mushroom, demonstrating his power and how easy it is. Krishna's eating dirt. Yashoda looks in Krishna's mouth, and she sees the whole universe in Krishna's mouth, and then she sees her looking into Krishna's mouth in the universe. And she faints. And so this kind of stuff happens. It happens in the next chapter when Krishna shows the universal form to Arjuna. You get these displays of opulence of Krishna, which are designed to really make you understand that we're not even approaching Krishna's C game. You actually can't give an example because Krishna is a singularity in that he is the source of all creation, and everything in this universe is just, it's an atom of Krishna's power. You can't really compare that to anything because any comparison you make, even if you compare, like an atom to all the atoms in the entire universe to one atom, it still doesn't work because Krishna's infinitude is greater than that. Do you follow this? One grain of sand to all the grains of sand on the beach. Ultimately, that's finite, and you could count that. So none of those examples work, but they help us to start to orient ourselves around it. And Krishna makes this beautiful point here, and this is our theology. And so if you understand our theology, then if somebody tries to critique you for having an idol, you're like, well, how is that an idol? How is that any less well established and thought through than your Bible? You believe that, sola scriptura, sola fide. You're a Protestant, Christian who's non-denominational. You still believe in only the Bible. You still believe to have faith in the Bible, and by faith in the Bible. Well, the Bible's a book written by 10 generations of non-Christians. Yeah, but God worked through them. Great, so God works through our stuff too. How is your mental image of God any more spiritual than our than our engraved image. If the image is engraved by someone who has a proper conception of God, it's actually more spiritual than your faulty mental image of God. Think about it. If you think about God, you're materializing God because you're using your mundane mind, which automatically limits God. So you're making a deity every time, a deity and an idol every time you think of God. What you should be more worried about is the people who have a proper understanding of divinity, who don't obfuscate the tradition, who don't opaque the tradition, who can transparently pass on the tradition, who are living embodiments of the tradition. Then, if they're drawing a picture, that picture is divinely inspired, like the Bible. You get it? So I want to give you guys an example of the value in being able to follow what's going on in the chapters, what's said in the chapters, what the ramifications of it are, is that you can start to apply it to different things you might have to troubleshoot as you're talking to somebody or as you're talking to yourself. And the books come to life, and they have actual beautiful information about divinity, perennial philosophy. But if you don't approach them with a high degree of focus, you'll miss it. Okay. We're done. Thank you very much for joining us on Instagram. So I got a little fiery earlier.